Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Limbrick, and I'm a professor in the Film and Digital Media Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'd like, first of all, to thank you all for joining us today for Cinematic Archives, Preservation and Circulation in the Maghreb. I want to first extend my thanks to ArteEast's team, Beth Stryker, Jinu Shweri, and Jordan Lee Thompson for their tireless work in setting up today's program and the related screenings. Special thanks too to our pair of translators, Aya Adika and Karine El-Khouri, for helping us make this event bilingual in French and English. If you prefer to hear this panel in French, you can join the French Zoom link, which is given in the chat, and click on the globe with the word interpretation. Pour vous rappeler, si vous voulez nous écouter en français, vous pouvez vous diriger vers le lien Zoom donné en chat et cliquer sur le globe dans la barre de commande avec le mot interprétation. Cinematic Archives, Preservation and Circulation in the Maghreb is presented as part of Alternative Archives, a series of programs that explore themes of storytelling, archiving, and evolving technologies in the digital world as they relate to the Southwest Asia and North Africa, or SWANA region. Alternative Archives is presented by ArteEast in partnership with the Arab American National Museum, New York University's Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies, the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture and Design, and the Honolulu Museum of Art. And this program is co-sponsored by the Center for the Middle East and North Africa at UC Santa Cruz. Today's panel is presented as part of ArteEast's new Unpacking the Arte Archive platform, presenting monthly screenings from our archive at artearchive.org. That archive comprises almost 20 years of programming, and today it forms a precious resource for all of those who love cinema from the region. The two-part program that I've curated, Radical Modernisms, Retracing Arab and North African Film Histories, is one of many events and activities designed to bring attention to the Arte Archive and the ways that it might continue to be a resource for the future. When I began to plan this program, I was struck by two things: the depth and breadth of ArteEast's programming, which has been simply extraordinary over this period of almost 20 years. I've benefited hugely from that by introducing my students to films that ArteEast made available in its traveling programs, and by doing research with those programs, like James Neal's Women's Cinema from Tangier to Tehran, or Rasha Salti's groundbreaking Mapping Subjectivity program, co-presented by ArteEast with the Museum of Modern Art. The films that ArteEast has shown have the potential to energize students and lovers of cinema and to enrich all those who encounter them, especially at a geographical distance from the places where those films were made and which they so beautifully depict. But a second thing struck me too: the incredible fragility of some facets of Arab cinema history and the urgent need to preserve, restore, recirculate, and engage with it. Even as US-based platforms like Netflix or Criterion belatedly catch up with the existence of Arab cinemas, there are thousands of other films from across the region that remain beyond the field of vision of spectators. Not only that, but our guides to those films, the filmmakers themselves, often labor in obscurity or are leaving us too soon. The richness of the Arab cinematic legacy and the urgency to recognize and engage with it is one of the impulses that underpin my recent book on Moomin Smihi's films and their relationship with Arab and world cinema. So the first part of this program began on October 15th with a dialogue around my book, Arab Modernism as World Cinema, the films of Moomin Smihi, with Smihi himself in attendance and Tariq Al-Hayek from UC Davis. You can find that conversation on the same Unpacking the Archive event site where you registered for this program, and on ArteEast's Facebook page in an October 15th post. That's going in the chat if you want to follow up on it. If you're curious about the book, there's a link there for that too. For the second part of the program, which continues through midnight today, Eastern Time, my desire was to foreground some of the incredible work being done with other archives that intersect with ArteEast's, especially today as it affects the Maghreb and its diaspora. My panelists today include the director of the Cinémathèque de Tanger, Sido Lansari, independent curator and researcher Léa Morin, based in France and Morocco, and Touda Bouanani, a video artist and curator of her family's archive in Rabat. Today, we'll talk about their work with the legacies of North African cinema and their attempts to preserve and recirculate important, rare, and groundbreaking films. What's more, you can still see some of that work. For about 9 more hours today, you can see 2 films by Ahmed Bouanani, 6 and 12, and Memory 14, or Mémoire 14, and a restored feature by Mustafa Derkawi about some meaningless events. Those are available at the Arte Archive, Unpacking the Arte Archive page, with a small donation or for free. Now I want to introduce my panelists. After that, they'll each present something about their work and I'll ask questions of them. Following that, we'll open up the conversation to those of you present online. And as soon as you think of a question, you can ask it any time in the chat. We will take note of those questions, we will put them in a line, and I will relay as many of them as I can. So don't be afraid to ask your question as early as you think of it. So I'll start by introducing Sido Lansari, who is the director and head of programming at the Cinémathèque de Tanger, North Africa's first art house cinema and film archive. He's been director since 2019. In 2020, he founded Divine, an online fanzine dedicated to arts and freedom of speech during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sido is also a visual artist and an award-winning filmmaker, and is a member of the network of Arab art house screens. Sido was traveling today, and so we recorded our conversation a few days ago on Zoom. Following Sido, we'll hear from Touda Bouanani, who graduated from the École des Beaux-Arts of Bordeaux in 1994. Through a singular approach to the dedication and the literary and cinematographic work of her father, the artist Ahmed Bouanani, she explores photography, drawing, and redrawing to recreate and reassemble a family universe where history meets fiction. Léa Morin is an independent curator and researcher. She's the co-founder of L'Observatoire Art and Research in Casablanca, and she's engaged in projects of editing, exhibition, and restoration that bring together researchers, artists, and practitioners. And she's especially interested in the period of the independence movements of the 1960s and 70s and in the stakes of cultural decolonization. She is one of the directors of Thalitha, a nonprofit organization devoted to alternative and experimental cinematic and sound archives, preservation, and redistribution. So now I'll turn it over to our first presentation from Sido Lansari. So Sido, I wonder if you could tell us first a little bit about the Cinémathèque de Tanger, which you are the director of.
Thanks for having me first. And yeah, the Cinémathèque, I always prefer to show images from the Cinémathèque and talk about it. So maybe I will let you watch a little video that we prepared a few years ago, and maybe you will have all the answers about how the Cinémathèque is working.
Welcome to the Tanger Cinémathèque. The Cinémathèque is a movie theater in Tanger, and a little bit more. The Cinémathèque is unique in Morocco, an art house cinema with a large and small screening room, library, a film collection, and cafe. The Cinémathèque lives in a historic building in downtown Tanger, the Cinema Riff. At the Tanger Cinémathèque, you can watch comedies, westerns, thrillers, sci-fi, classic sci-fi, documentaries, animated films. Sometimes the movies are very long or very short. Sometimes they're in between. At the Tanger Cinémathèque, movies are Moroccan, Japanese, Egyptian, Indian, French, Lebanese, Spanish, Italian, from everywhere. Sometimes the films are in black and white, sometimes very colorful. Sometimes they are very chatty or quiet, very quiet. Lots of different people come to the Tanger Cinémathèque. Tall people, short people, very tall, or very short, to watch movies, to hang out, to discover something new, or just to have a coffee. The Tanger Cinémathèque is home to a film archive. Filmmakers have entrusted us their films to digitize, preserve, and share them. There are movies from 1901, 1935, 1969, 1996, 2005. Sometimes the Tanger Cinémathèque is invited to Paris, Miami, Porto, Dubai, Marrakesh. Today, the Tanger Cinémathèque depends on people who watch movies, people who have a coffee, people who buy t-shirts, white, blue, red, yellow. At the Tanger Cinémathèque, people see friends, watch movies, work, make new friends, stop by, take photos, or just have a coffee.
So thanks. I think that shows really the kind of vibrancy of the space and the institution. I know from personal experience, it really does feel like a center in the middle of Tangier. It has a very important role like that. The presentation shows a lot about kind of screenings that you have and the way that this is a social hub for people everywhere. Can you tell us a little bit about the film collection, which we see there very briefly in this wonderful shot of very, very busy shelves, many things on them. Tell us a little bit about that collection and how it came about.
Yeah, actually, the Cinémathèque is like, we have a lot of jobs at the same place. We are an art house in the theater and a preservation and archive space and a cafeteria, etc. But what we do a lot is try to collect and preserve all of different material about archive, photography, films, scenarios, etc. And we try to have this safe space for people and for their archives. So we work a lot with the amateur archives, and this is how we started actually. And at the beginning of the Cinémathèque, in 15 years ago, we still don't have an institutional Cinémathèque. You have plans of it since a few years now, but not a very official with all the resources that you need at the Cinémathèque, the Moroccan Cinema Center. And this is how we started, like just like because we had this emergency of having this safe place and but all these archives between safe hands, and this is how all started, and this is why we continue now to do it. And we did it a little bit accidentally at the beginning, and we're still doing it since we don't have this official structure in Morocco. And I'm sure that if one day we'll have this official Cinémathèque in Morocco, I'm sure that we will still be this alternative space for alternative archives, for example, video artists or art photography, etc. And this is how we work a lot with amateur archives as well, just to open all our doors to all kinds of images. And this is really how we run it, and we go into our reflection about what our archives for our now for us now, and how we imagine it now today in 2021.
Great. Do people come to you with material? Do you find that people think of you now as a place to deposit material that they might have? And what kind of material is that? Are they bringing film or other things?
We have a lot of different material, films for professional films like filmmakers, producers, etc. Also with amateur archives. We always we are always open to receive all these kind of archives. We do calls to collect them as well. Just to remind don't have like to separate it from all this material. Trash, it's not trash anymore, and and this is how today we have this very various and very rich collections of like from photography, films, books. We have a lot of books just behind me, and we are always welcome to receive more and more.
Now, many of us who are researchers, myself included, have accessed that collection over the years. How do you see that question of access? Who are you collecting for, and how do you negotiate people coming to use the space and to see this work?
Actually, we have all these archives to be used just to have a door. This idea of doors open is very fundamental for us here to give access to all our archives to for research. For students, we have a faculty of documentary just 1 hour from here in Tetouan, and they use it a lot as a research in their research, in their master's. And also open just to the public if you're curious, you're a tourist and you're curious to know more about cinema in Morocco, cinema in here. Yeah, it's open for you as well. And what we try to do as well is to show, for example, our collection together. We do some screening from professional or amateur archives, films that we show, that we share a lot in our social media as well, just to be open and to say everyone that it's something very live that we have, not only the past, it's the present and also our future.
This is really important because I think this is what larger state official archives around the world often have problems doing, is that level of interface with the public. Does it help that you're physically in the center of Tangier? Do you feel like this location changes the mission of the archive in some way?
Yeah, of course, and people ask for it because we are in the city, we are in a very vintage building, so everything is calling people like to be curious and to know more about cinema, and that's why cinema is very. We have this identity of cinema everywhere. It's not just cinema posters, but you have cinema in the cafeteria, outside the building, etc. It's very interesting to remind people that this is a cinema place, not only cafeteria, not only that we have all this heritage of cinema here, and it's open to you.
What are the issues you face of preservation? If you're collecting many different materials, film has certain kinds of requirements for preserving celluloid. We think of digital as being the answer to everything, but archiving digital material has issues and problems of longevity as well. How are you negotiating those issues?
Well, the main issue that we have is money, of course. We are independent, so and it takes a lot of money, of course, to have all this equipment, all this, because we take care about that. So this is the issue that we have. We have a lot of creativity inside the film. Have some grants, some support from, for example, the US Embassy in Morocco, support us in our archives project. That support is not enough, and this is one of the main issues that we have. We also have all this. We are asking ourselves about all the digital archives now, how we deal with it, how we do the archive job from now for now, etc. And this is something really question that we are totally aware about, and we are trying to have all this equipment and all this strategy about it. And for example, we think that for the video, the artist's video format is not present in museums here, in galleries, etc. So we try to have part of our collection dedicated to the art video, because we know that all the work artists, that they don't have the alternative to put in a safe place their work, and trying to be this alternative for them as well. And this is all the ideology that we have in our archive, that the alternative can be here when where we need us, and where the emergency is, and where we can be useful.
You mentioned earlier that to some extent your archive is a little bit accidental. Some things were deposited intentionally, perhaps other things were left over. And this has happened everywhere in the world where prints were cleaned up often from when they began by distributors or film companies. Do you have issues to negotiate there around copyright and rights to hold or preserve or screen this material? What is the status of that?
Not really, because we work with people totally aware of the situation here in Morocco. For example, you're an Arab filmmaker, so you wish that a copy of your film will be in a safe place here in Morocco. If one day you will use it, etc. And it's the same relationship that we have with the writers, with the distributors, etc. Because they know you have all this solidarity between us, have all the, they know as well that we will not use it for that purpose.
Last of all, what do you feel is the most urgent question or issue for you as an archivist, as a cinema at this point?
Yeah, it's not maybe a bigger space now, as, for example, we have a lot of Cinémathèque that they don't have around the world. So they have a lot of spaces, not only in the building, to preserve, and this is what we need today. We miss space, and we need more space and more equipment to keep more and more of them. And the emergency now, we're working on it, and we are working on it a lot with the Moroccan artists and filmmakers, to just imagine one day that we'll have a bigger space to preserve everything. And for example, here it's very humid, so we also need a lot of money to have all this.
We hope you can find it, and thank you. And thank you to Sido for making that possible. Thank you to our audience for bearing with us during what we understand was not very good sound quality through that clip. But just two quick reminders before we move to our next speaker. If you think of a question, please feel free to pose it at any time in the chat, and we will address as many questions as we can later during the Q&A period. If you're just joining us, if you prefer to listen to the rest of the program in French, you can choose interpretation in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen and click on French for interpretation. Si vous préférez de nous écouter en français, vous pouvez choisir français ou interprétation dans la barre de commande.
Française.
So now we will move to our next presenter, which is Touda Bouanani from Rabat, and we look forward to hearing about some of Touda's work with the Bouanani archive. We may have temporarily lost Touda. So I'm going to suggest, Léa, if I can proceed straight to you, and hopefully we'll get Touda back on the line shortly.
Oui, avec plaisir. J'espère que ça marche. Merci beaucoup, Peter. Merci, ArteEast.
Thank you very much, Peter. So thank you very much, everyone. So I'm going to try to share my screen directly with you. So here you go. I really hope that everything is working for everyone. So what I'm trying to share with you through this really brief presentation that is going to be, of course, followed by a discussion, is to speak about the work of the preservation of the cinematic archives. Let's say the archives that are not aligned and that are non-dominant in the sense that these archives will not be the ones dominant of the writing of stories of the arts, of the stories of cinema. So I'm going to try to speak really briefly about the gestures, let's say the practices, the methods, in addition to the thinking about what this preservation is, because I think that while reflecting on these archives and on their preservation, it is really, really important to take into account the specificities, so the particularities and the place of these archives, as I said, that are not aligned and non-dominant, because these archives document the stories that are invisibilized and marginalized, even if we take into account their geography of production, because currently we're going to speak particularly of archives coming from the north of Africa, or if we take into account their specific context of production. For example, they were produced in a militant contest, a battle contest, the colonial contest, etc. So I am going to use the term preservation, so the preservation of archives. I'm also going to speak about the actions of conservation, as Sido has already mentioned. I'm going to speak about restoration, but also I'm going to speak about the diffusion and the circulation of the films, and not only films, because Touda is going to mention mention a lot about this, because we don't not only speak about films, we speak about objects, about documents, about photographs, about all the materials, all the traces that accompany movies and that participate as well in this, let's say, tentative writing of the story of the colonization of cinema. That means for me that the story can take these lacks, these wounds, let's say, and to reestablish the cinema that was long non-considered in its essence. This is what we're going to try to restore, what we are currently restoring via these different examples, these projects. And I'm going to show you a couple of movies from the programs that have been proposed by Peter. So this is where we're trying to restore, what we were trying, and we're going to try to restore through these projects. And we're not only doing this through movies, but we're going to try to restore some sort of aesthetic, some sort of political stories that were so long marginalized. And this image of the work, so the work of research and of restoration that we have conducted for Touda Bouanani and Ahmed Bouanani's movie Ali in Wonderland. And it's the same thing for Mustafa Derkawi's movie. On the image that we see on the right, this is the set. So as you can see, it is the first, let's say, a feature of Moroccan filmmaker Mustafa Derkawi, who directed the movie about some meaningless events, as you can see it here. And we find it in the program that has been prepared by Peter. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the restoration of this movie. I have met Mustafa Derkawi in 2014 in Casablanca at his place, and in order to conduct some research on the history of cinema and in the perspective of a program of movies. And at that moment, I asked him particularly about his first movie, because it was iconic. So this movie entitled about some meaningless events that has been completed in Casablanca in 1974. So this movie does not exist anymore. We can not find a copy of this movie anymore. So this lack particularly interested me, because I have started this research, I have started this exploration, let's say, by these absences, by these lacks. This was my introduction. So I was trying to work based on the traces, based on the marks that were left, in order to reconstruct some of the cinema that has been lost, that has been forgotten, because I had the intuition that something was, let's say, traversing them, something more complex, in order to reconstruct that story. So this movie, so Mustafa does not know where are the original negatives of this movie. He doesn't know where they are. It's not that, but the laboratory that have developed these movies in the 70s in Spain
the movie, so it does not exist anymore, and the movie has not been shown since 1974. So this lab went bankrupt. So the question that so the questions or this absence really violently is opposed to the traces that are left of this movie. There is the new cinema. There is implication of a generation of artists, of activists from Morocco. This is a participatory collective experience. There is a unique mode of production, and we can say a lot of things on this movie. And of course, there is the ban of this movie. And in addition to that, it's a really, really unique experimentation and an avant-gardist and innovative approach in the heart of the 70s in Casablanca. So this is a movie that was lost, that was banned, and there was only one copy in a really bad state. We could not hear the sound even, but that was left. But I found a lot of things. I found some press reviews. I had a lot of interviews about the movie. We had a big archive of photographies, and even at the attic at Mustafa's house, we found a lot of marks, a lot of traces in order to reconstruct this movie. And finally, in 2016, after having many exchanges with laboratories in Spain, the research of the organization that has found that the laboratory that was bankrupt in 1990. I was very happy to know that it went to the Cinémathèque of Catalonia in Barcelona. So as you can see here, this is the first photo that has been taken by the archivist, and the mail that is very important that was sent by the curator. And because I'm sharing these images because they're really important to me, especially this image, and I really took into account the importance of really take care of these materials and not stop there. So I had months and months of research on the movies, a lot of interviews. So the materials that I have here, I really see it really in a very different matter, let's say. And even as you can see here, the difficulty of the movie can be perceived. The fact that all of these steps that were really terrible by the filmmaker, and everything, all the efforts, all of the sacrifices that were deployed and made in order for this movie to become a reality. And everything that I see here, it reflects a lot of hope, the political, the aesthetic hope that can be reflected in this movie. And it's just the hope of a revolution, a cultural, a political revolution that can be perceived in this film. So as you can see here, we can finally find the role that is the materialism of the story, and the role of the movie that we found. So it was really clear that we needed to give it to professionals, we needed to give it to renovators that were going to be able to take care of it, and that will allow the movie, that will revive it and allow it to re-become, let's say, the existing movie that they were in 74. And this is exactly what the experts in the Cinémathèque of Catalonia have done. And I knew a very big part of the movie of this, a very big part of the history of this roll of film, let's say, and there is a story that is encrypted inside of it. And I would like really to tell you the story of it, the adventure that this roll of film has completed. So it was so the foil, let's say, has been or the roll of film has been bought in East Europe, and then it came back to Morocco, and so the movie had to be stopped at some point because there wasn't enough money. And afterwards, the roll of film went to development, let's say, and in order for it to be edited in Spain at the Photofilm, in the laboratory that was known to be a very important laboratory because it was specialized in the 16mm format, and the movie was completed between Rhine and between Rome. And so they went with this to Rome because they were actually completing another movie in Iraq at the same time. So they were doing this editing in Rome. So there they benefited from that order in order to go to Rome. And then they had it subtitled in Paris. And afterwards, they took it back to Morocco, and it was shown secretly because it was banned at a festival. And afterwards, it was shown as well in the apartment of the Terkawi brothers. And the originals, then they stayed in the stock of the laboratory for the film in Spain. And in the 90s, so bankruptcy, etc. So they were just in hangars. Then afterwards, the Cinémathèque of Catalonia was able to find them. So if I'm telling this, it's because the discovery of this roll of film, the perspective of having it restored has happened. It was really, really impossible because after this terrible adventure that this roll had lived, let's say, it was really important that this movie continues, its adventure continues, its voyage, let's say. It has been translated into 1,000 languages today. It has been screened in the whole world, and it has really retaken, let's say, its space, its place in the world of cinema. So it's debated, it's shared, it's talked about, etc. Why did I tell you this story? I don't want to take a lot of your time as well afterwards, but I would like to add a little bit on this work. Why am I telling this story? We see that this movie is a pillar, let's say, of the historical, of the political history, of the history of cinema in Morocco, after the history of the cultural history in Morocco, and we ask if it is how it is really, really necessary to write a story that takes into account these absences. And this is the project that I'm engaged with, because we can see here, like the Durkheim brothers are studying in Poland, and we see that these filmmakers in Morocco everywhere are going to go to complete their studies abroad. And when they come back to Morocco, their objective is to really come decolonize this culture, to have this storytelling that is their own storytelling, but very fast. And this is an example of Durkheim's movie. They're going to be opposed to the official vision, let's say, of society, of the story that's wanted by the state and by the colonial institutions that are ruling, that are controlling everything. So this change of vision, this disequilibrium of vision is there, and it is a problem that is faced by these very important filmmakers that could not, at the end, realize and complete the movies and the cinema that they wanted to. So the project that I'm currently conducting tries to, through these fragments, through these traces, through these marks, to reconstruct this cinema that has been thought about, that has been imagined, a cinema that proposed something that is encrusted in the Moroccan culture. So as such, we have the cinema that really wants to have the Moroccan art in the avant-garde of modernity. For example, we have our archive that has not been realized, a cinema that is attacking some social problematic, a radical cinema, a battle against colonization, cultural colonization. A cinema that would like to be the third cinema, so not a cinema of authors, not a commercial cinema, not a cinema that does not hesitate, let's say, to experience with the cinematographic language in order to find its tendency, to find its direction. So in order to look for these traces, it's important to find these scenarios, these movies. Go back to magazines. For example, we have this magazine Cinématra that is in the Bouanani archives. Go into the catalogs, in the articles, and of course have a lot of interviews with different people. As you can see here, this is work conducted by Les Enfants du Haut. So one of these movies that has been lost in the cinema, and the Moroccan cinema. And Karim Idris, the filmmaker, also studied in Poland. So this is one of the images. So it's really, really important to go back to the cinema that has been done abroad by these filmmakers. So my colleague and I, Marie-Pierre Butier, have been able to find these movies that were completed in Poland. So through these research, through this research is not only, sometimes I really find movies, not only marks, not only fragments, and these projects of restorations are really essential, and I can reconstruct, re-establish these movies, and this is the case for the first movie of Mustafa Derkawi, which is entitled About Some Meaningless Events. So this is the story that I wanted to tell you, and we can continue with the discussion afterwards, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Léa, for a beautiful presentation and so much important work. We have Touda back with us, and so Touda, I am going to pass the microphone to you to tell us more about your work. Just a reminder for our audience, please think of your questions and post them in the chat at any time, and we'll try to return to as many as possible after our presentations. Touda. And Touda, I see you are still muted right now. You need to unmute, please.
Oh,
thank
bonjour.
you.
Bonsoir.
So good evening. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me? So my name is Touda Bouanani. I'm the daughter of Ahmed Bouanani. So there are two movies in the program about him. So Memory 14, 6, and 12. I'm gonna take about that. These are two movies that draw the history of Morocco through the vision or the perspective of a Moroccan person. It's very strange that any history would be from someone else's perspective. In Morocco, and also with all the countries that have been colonized, the first perspective is someone else's perspective. So Ahmed Bouanani wanted to re-establish, to rebuild this point of view, actually, this perspective, this angle, by taking colonial archives and telling a different story through poetry, legends, and through Moroccans' way of viewing, of seeing things. In this movie, Mémoire 14, Memory 14, he would actually film new images. He will shoot new images that were back then forbidden. So the relation to the Reef Republic, of which he couldn't transcribe the story. So he went on shooting or filming men and women there and during this period, so that they would be present. What is also surprising, that these men and women are seeing us spectators. There's an inversion of the actor viewer relationship or proportion. So then after the end of Mémoire 14, so we're talking about the modern Morocco represented by Casablanca. It's a collective work, it's a joint work that was done by Mohamed Rashish also, and it's a movie that includes references to other movies. I'm sorry, but I'm forgetting the names of the directors. So two movies that were done that were actually made about cities. So these two movies show. So one movie is Man with a Movie Camera. So these two movies show are about the work of Ahmed Bouanani. So Anna Sandy, that was in the family apartment 2006, where the archives of all the city, sorry, of all the life of Ahmed and Naima Bouanani. They also work in cinema. She used to be the collaborator of many other directors, and also the costume designer, artistic director and producer. Also, this accident was terrible. So this fire was terrible due to the consequences of the fire and of the water. So a big share of the archives and documents and films were lost, were destroyed. This destruction was a tragedy, of course. And with my mother, we tried to recover some of the documents of the manuscripts, and to our great surprise, there were many manuscripts. The paper resisted the fire and the water, and the papers were actually could survive this this accident, this fire. So when my mom and dad died, and after this fire, a problem emerged, that what will happen with what's in this house. If I don't do anything, everything will disappear. So little by little, I wasn't the only one to be actually worried about this or concerned about this. Many people like Ali Safi, who made Enquête de la septième porte, which is a movie showing interviews with my father during the last years of his life, that was actually projected in Berlin, in the Berlinale in 2017. Also, there was Léa Morin and the Cinémathèque of Tanger, Cinémathèque de Tanger, with whom we made a retrospective about Ahmed and Naima Bouanani. So there were many translations published while he was living. And among these manuscripts, there was one that was very much awaited, the history of cinema in Morocco. So the seventh gate, crossing the seventh gate. This is the book. And it's actually constituted by 3 manuscripts, 3 archives written in 82, 84, and 96. And we actually spent quite a lot of time to reconstitute this manuscript with Omar Barrada, Manika Achi, Ali Safi, and the edition house in Rabat, Culte. So we could publish it in 2020 after a very tedious work. This work is still unaccomplished, actually. The book is a story. It's a work that have been actually started with little resources, no internet. And we actually discovered that today, even with the internet, nothing is really accessible from the history of Moroccan cinema or of the cinema of Maghreb countries. Very little material is on internet. So we want to change this fact, this situation. We want to make it visible, accessible on the internet. And we have been working with many people on what we call the Bouanani Collective, the Bouanania in Arabic. We founded an association called Bouanani Archives, and we organized an exhibition that was presented in Marrakesh yesterday. All the countries so that was a chapter of the seventh gate. well, about a chapter of the Seventh Gate, all the people that are dying from cold, actually. I'm sorry, I lost the thread of my ideas. Sorry.
Excusez-moi. Donc, je vais vous montrer une affiche, pardon, de cette exposition.
Please, would you excuse me? I will show you a poster from this exhibition.
Voilà.
So as you see,
c'est une exposition avec
so it's an exhibition with the program Awan with Nadir Bouhmouch and Soumaya Ait Ahmed that are both working on archives. And we also organized an exhibition in Riyadh composed of 5 chambers or rooms where the archives were exhibited in 4 of them. We invited a young artist with an artistic residency, Idris Bouammar, who is a director of animation movie, and he will work with archives, with film elements or movie elements and elements of popular tradition. For example, something called taranja, which is a doll that is actually fabricated to fight dryness or water scarcity. So there's also a film program in Marrakesh and other cities in Morocco. We also have a platform to be able to share on internet not only the archives about cinema, but also everything that has to do with non-film documentation, be it photography, audio, or other material, and also about other jobs about which we talk less, like decoration, costumes, outfits, makeup, photographs, all other technical jobs in the movie industry.
Voilà, j'avais envoyé 2 visuels.
So I have sent 2 presentations or slides. I don't know if you got the chance to see them. So yeah,
I think we'll be able to show one in just a moment. There we are.
Voilà, donc ça c'est la... Pardon.
So this is... I don't think... This is Bouanani family. Naima Saoudi, Ahmed Bouanani, and Batul Bouanani. So the 3 of them worked in the cinema. My sister was a costume designer, and Ahmed Bouanani, poet, movie maker, writer, and Naima that I introduced just now. So among all the things that I have talked about, I talked about poetry and writing. Ahmed Bouanani was also a novelist, a script writer, and there are so many manuscripts of scripts, novels, stories, poems.
Avec ce collectif.
With this collective. So the Bouanani archive, there's an exhibition in Rabat called À la recherche du temps perdu, or Looking for Lost Time. where we focus on the notion or the concept of treasure. What is a treasure? So, because at the end of the day, even a paper document is also a treasure, because it tells a story that is actually lost, that has no traces anymore. So in the exhibition, there will be a special focus on the Moroccan cinema, on the pioneer of Moroccan cinema, Ahmed Bouanani, who started his first movies with Ibn Rabat, Tarzan. So to go from dream to reality, which means, why not me? He started in 1941 with 95 millimeters to actually make short movies about Tarzan, a Tarzan. And in Marrakesh exhibition, we actually, one of the rooms was dedicated to children, to exhibit these movies about Tarzan, and in which, well, we encourage children to dream after these years that have passed without any event and without dreaming. And I thank you. Oh, so there's a last picture. Yeah, sorry, there's a last slide or picture, photograph.
Est-ce qu'on peut avoir la deuxième photo?
Can we have the second picture, please? Second slide.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Oui. Ah, d'accord.
Yes, okay. I cannot see it actually, but if you can see it, that's perfect. So this is our first logo. We made it, well, based on a character of in the 80s, actually, in a newspaper. And we actually took this character, this mascot, this animal, and we designed the logo based on this animation character of the 80s. And thank you.
Thank you, Touda. It's a beautiful image to finish on. I'd like to pose a couple of questions to you both, which I hope might connect things together with Sido's presentation. And we are also starting to get some questions from our audience. Just a reminder to those of you joining us, you can put your questions either in French or in English into the chat, and we will handle as many questions as we have time for. So I'd like to start by asking you both something that emerges from Sido's presentation. And he mentioned very briefly that there are students from the documentary school in Tétouan who come to the Cinémathèque de Tanger and who work with the archive. And in a sense, he suggested that they are learning with the archive. And I feel like the same could be said for the work that both of you are doing, which seems to me to be posing possibilities for students, for the public, for people in Morocco and in the Maghreb, but also for those of us who are mostly located beyond that. We've now had CC12 and Memory 14 screening in the United States. As Léa mentioned, Ali and Wonderland and About Some Meaningless Events have been screened in many parts of Europe, and we had our US premiere this weekend. So the work you are doing seems to come in a way that helps the preservation of cultural memory in the Maghreb, but that also enlightens those of us living outside. Could you talk about how your work is balancing these roles and these tasks and challenges?
Je peux commencer à répondre peut-être. Oui, tu poses la question de...
So may I start to answer this question? So you're talking about the people who are abroad, of course, but what is most important is these filmmakers, these students, these young students, and all of these people who are currently discovering their own history of cinema. And here, I think the presentation that Touda just completed is really, really important, because if you understood, and you already did, that the project for the future is to have an online platform which would be offered to everyone, accessible to everyone, and where we can find the integrity of the archives, with the archives of the integrity of the Bouanani archives that were collected by her father year after year, and who as well was trying to rewrite this history of cinema. So all of these archives that we as researchers, as Bouanani researchers, have tried to collect from here and from there. So we want to have this one centralized space where everyone can have this access to all of these archives. This is a really exceptional project that will be offered to all the new generations of filmmakers, or of all people that are interested in culture and art in Morocco or abroad or outside of Morocco. So this is, I think, the work of the Bouanani archives is really exceptional, and as Touda has mentioned, through the expositions, through the artists, if this will of opening up these archives, and so there is this will to open up these archives, to valorize these archives, to circulate these archives, and the four new spaces to be open based on these elements of the past, of the memory that are preserved. And this is of course as well the will of Ahmed Bouanani. This is what he was doing all of his life. This is what Touda is doing through the comedies, through everything. She is trying to extend the work of Ahmed Bouanani. So this is my answer to that.
Oui, le partage avec les jeunes générations artistes.
So sharing this with the young filmmakers, with the young generations, is something really, really important. And this is something that we would like to implement. We do not want to add this sacred character to this work, but sharing of this discussion in order for people to really, really talk about it. This is what we would like to achieve.
Can I follow up by asking then, what is in your minds particular and vital about this period? When we think about all of the cinema that we might turn to, I know you're both interested in the period, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. What do we learn from that now? What is the relevance today, especially for Moroccans, for this heritage?
Oui, j'allais rajouter quelque chose et ça rejoint peut-être la
I
question.
wanted to add something, and maybe it can also answer the question that you just asked. So after Mustafa Derkawi's movie, so the first one about some meaningless events has been visible again, and it's circulating actually right now, and I really hope that it's going to circulate more and more. So I had returns, and there was a young filmmaker who was saying that maybe my own cinema would not be the same if I actually saw this movie before. So maybe we can integrate this into the continuity of this cinema, and it's something that I started to, when I started to go into the history of cinema in Morocco, some things were said and they were wrong. So this idea, from one side, this idea of a Moroccan cinema, of a first Moroccan cinema that would be, let's say, boring, lost, was not really interesting, as if the new generation was imagining the year 2000. However, there was a really creative, avant-gardist, radical cinema that was present during that period. So it was really, really important to rediscover it right now at this moment. And in addition to that, nothing was present before. So there were no archives, nothing exists. So it's a country without memories, etc. However, there were a lot of things that were present, and I'd like it to stress on the fact there were a lot of things in the libraries and at Bouanani's residence, etc. Of course, we have national institutions that could centralize all of this. However, there is not a lead, let's say, of archives. So everything, all of the magazines are offered, they're accessible to the researchers. You can actually have access to all of that. So I think that it's really, really important for the new generations of filmmakers in order for them to actually go into these locations. And I try to do that as well with a website named cinema3.com. And it's a bilingual website, and it could really, really offer in a really simple way online a maximum number of documents. And there was very important text that was in one of the magazines that was translated into Arabic for the first time by Ahmed Bouanani for this website. So this is the first time that this text is actually accessible. So I think this is the way to do it. I apologize, but I have not heard the question.
I asked Touda, what do you both think the stakes are in turning to this particular period for filmmakers and for students of cinema today? What do these archives teach us now in the present? I'm seeing Touda's video a little frozen. So while we wait for her to catch up, I might move to another question that comes from our audience, and it's from Saeed Shamlal, who asks about censorship. And this was a question posed, first of all, to Touda about the experiences that Bouanani had with the censorship of Memoir 14, but I could equally extend the question to you, Léa, about the experience of the censorship of Derkawi's film. Would you like to speak a little bit to this question of censorship in the past and perhaps the challenges now for people working with these archives in the present?
Oui, c'est vraiment ce que j'avais essayé de mettre en avant dans ma présentation.
Yes, this is what I tried to shed the light on during my presentation. There was a cinema after the independence of Morocco that's been imagined by these young filmmakers. However, the actual state was in another, it was something else, because the censorship question is a very, very complex matter. We cannot just reduce it to just a simple censorship. So the movie, Mustafa Derkawi's movie, has been banned to be exported, has been banned to be projected. So it's it's not like Bouanani's movie, so there was a part of the movie that was censored. However, here the movie was censored; it was banned completely. So I really say that this is a very, very violent experience just for a filmmaker's first movie to be banned, and afterwards. Um, Mustafa Darkawi is currently the filmmaker that has completed a lot of movies, like the highest number of movies in Morocco, even though he has not been active for 15 years now. So of course, it's a big, big suffering, a big personal battle. And this is what I tried to explain in the introduction. There's a lot of movies that could not flourish. All of these filmmakers that I love, Karim Idris, who had beautiful movies made when he was a student in Poland, and who unfortunately could not realize his cinema, could not realize his movies, could not contain his movies because of that vision at that time that was present. I would also like to say that in addition to that, all of the story of Ahmed Bouanani can be told by Touda. So I'm going to give her the floor to share it.
Je suis désolée parce que j'étais déconnectée.
I am really sorry, but I was disconnected. So I just understood that we were talking about censorship, but again, I did not hear the question.
Could you
So the censorship around Memory 14, that was the question. All right. So I already mentioned it briefly during my presentation, but I didn't really go into details. So as I already mentioned, the war in the Reef was censored. So this was a part. And in addition to that, there was another part that was censored, which was about a resistant who was Mohammed. And these two stories were erased because you could not talk about that. And this part has been removed. So the movie had to be 1.5 hours long, and the movie is just 25 minutes long because of that. And Dad was laughing and was saying, so the movie has been cut so many times, and it was hard on him to follow his own movie because of that, because of the censorship that was applied to it. And he spoke as well about, not about a censorship, let's say, but of a lack, of an absence. In the movies and in the French movies, let's say, there were not a lot of portraits, not a lot of faces of Moroccans that were appearing. So when he was completing the portraits of women and men in the Reef, he did not only relate it to, it was not only related to the absence of the history of Morocco, but as well to the absence of the faces of these Moroccan men and women under the protectorate. So about the censorship as well, he mentioned that, so he always said first, he mentioned the sonar bands around the movies and the he tried and they were he told me that the censorship was not only in the image but as well in the sound. So more attention was paid to the image and not to the sound. So he tried to use the sound in order to transmit his message. In addition to that, the censorship was not quite direct because for 6 and 12 he has presented the scenario, and the scenario has been refused, and afterwards he could not do it himself, so he completed it with Shish and Tazi, his friends at that time. And as he mentioned, they had a collective movie made, and in 71, when he was filming Memory 14, and when he had problems with the censor was the director of the cinematography department at that time. There was the attack on Hwasahandu, and this director, this person was dead during the attack, and let's say this put an end to the censorship that Ahmed Bouanani was facing at that time. And let's say at the time he was censored because first he had long hair, let's start. And when he was at IDEC, all of his friends were communists. So these were the two elements, let's say, that were seen with a very negative way.
Thank you. I wonder, Léa, if you could speak a little bit more about your work with the film Ali in Wonderland, which I think astonished any of us who had the chance to see it over the weekend. Could you say a little bit more about the issues that you faced finding and working to preserve that film?
Oui, d'accord. Donc c'est un peu une autre histoire puisque
So it's a little bit of another story, but there are a lot of common elements with Moroccan cinema, because this movie has been completed, has been filmed in a very particular context. It goes back to Mohan Smihi's movie as well, that completed movie that filmed something that was related to the conditions of labor, displacement, immigration, etc. And this is how I found this movie when I was researching as well on more cinema, more films, let's say, because these filmmakers from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Algeria, about Ali studies in France. So this movie, they were actually making films on the conditions of immigrant workers abroad. So there were a lot of movies that really marked me. For example, Medandou movies, Sineto movies, in order to they gave the word, they took the word from the first person, in addition to using the using the particular elements. So this movie, so there were movies that were completed by two students from the Vincennes University who have completed their projects on cinema. So first of all, they had experimented movies, let's say, but afterwards they wanted to put an end to, they wanted to forget that this political daily engagement, and they had this movie filmed in order, so as a start, as a way to link this their vision with the, let's say, revolution, because it's the militant movie, the militant cinema, because of course in a way it was the 70s, and it was something exceptional, because from one side we have this militant movies, and from another we had this research, this exploration of a movie. So this really opened the door, and they wanted to get this experimental movie, they wanted to experimental cinema, they wanted to get it out from its ghetto, in order to take into account some social problematic. So I found this movie through an interview with its co-director, and she was explaining a lot to me, and it was at the first interview, and and she was telling me that as an Algerian, I wanted to work on the cinematographic material. I didn't want to copy the French movies, so it was, as I mentioned, the research of a third direction, a cinema that would be related. It was not copied, it's related to the identity, to the culture, etc. So she was the one who was researching in experimental cinema, and I wanted to see the movie, of course, when I talked to her, to the co-director, and this has started that way. And the movie was not available. It was just a copy that was shown at the start of the 2000 by Nicole Berenez at the French Cinémathèque, and it was a red copy. You could not hear the sound, and really you could not, the movie was not transmitting its force, its power. So I started to contact directors, and I really wanted to localize the negatives, and afterwards I have the movie restored. I really don't want to talk about the technical technical details, and of course I needed to take the originals and the negatives into account, and this famous copy, the 16mm copy that I already mentioned, allowed me to reach this result. And this movie has been shown in Marsilia and Bologna, etc. And I really hope that is going to be shown, it's going to be screened. And I really hope if there are any people interested that are in our audience today, now please contact me again because I'm trying to circulate it. So the directors were Jurha Abouda and Ahmed Bouanani. And of course, when we work on this period, on the 70s, we work on filmmakers that are men and not women. And of course, the first movies that are filmed by women were completed after a while. So in addition to that, they gave the word to women and the first time. And I think that this was the first time that I saw it, because the word was given to men, usually to migrant workers who are men.
And I would follow that by saying, I think it's important that so many of the people now working on this legacy, like yourselves, are women. And this is where we see this energy today. I have a couple more questions in the chat to get to. And if you have another, please feel free to post it there. One from Bushra Khalili, who writes, for Touda, I'm very impressed by your approach to Bouanani's archives, a living material that can be activated in multiple ways, including through the hands of young artists and writers. And by doing this, you avoid fetishizing the archives. I see in your conception of Bouanani's work the most beautiful illustration of his concept of decolonizing culture, restoring to Moroccans the right to their own image. Touda, would you comment on this? Does it seem to be an apt description of, whoops, I think we just lost Touda again to the connection. Well, I'll let that stand as a wonderful comment for now. And I'd like to move to another question, which responds to you, Léa. So far, there are many people asking where they can see the film Ali in Wonderland again, and of course the Darqawi film as well. Do you have other concrete plans for distribution? I know that I think Ali is going to be in France quite soon. Could you tell us a little bit about the plans for further circulation?
Oui, on va essayer, on va bien sûr, oui, vous m'entendez, on va essayer de le montrer au maximum, et pas seulement.
Well, yes, sure. We will try to show the movie in many places, not only in cinema theaters, in cultural centers, in schools, in many places, so that the movie would be shown widely. There's no specific plan, actually, for the film projection. Of the places that would be interested, but maybe if Touda is not back, I can say a word about the Bouanani archives, because I'm part of the group, of the collective. The wonderful people that are really engaged in creating Bouanani archives, the association. So our idea was knowing that these last years there was a lot of work about Bouanani, publication, diffusion of his movies, but there was no real action to preserve and spread this family archive. But now this is like a great program that is starting with Marrakech exhibition, Rabat exhibition, and the diffusion of his movies in many cities, universities, schools. And many people who are listening to us are part of a club of any university in Morocco. Please do not hesitate in asking us. This is a program that can be actually projected and shown anywhere. And of course, we're talking about this book about the history of cinema, so Crossing the Seventh Gate. we were trying to create with artists, with thinkers, through residency programs about Bouanani archives, so that people can create their own way of thinking, their own perspective of Bouanani's family, not only Ahmed, Nadia and Batul, and also Touda. And also what I wanted to say is that we were talking here also about collecting. In my work, there are many private archives in filmmakers' collections. We're not talking here only about Bouanani's archives, but also Darkawi's archives. We will link them together so that this platform would be a place of general of other archives, and that would be taken care of.
And can you talk about any new or upcoming restoration projects like this, aside from the Bouanani archive, that you might be involved in? This is another question from the audience.
Ouais, il y a énormément de choses à faire.
So there are so many things to do and organize. When only if we talk about Mustafa Darkawi's cinema, on which I have worked so many movies, and other projects or films, the Bourgeon of Shahrazad and some other movies are also on the way to be shown. And this is and there's the work of subtitling of these movies. Also, the Moroccan Cinema Center, Cinematographic Center, is also doing spreading efforts to restore these movies. And I hope there will be things to do together. And one thing I really would like to see and realize is to see all the movies of Mustafa Darkawi being like circulating and being shown and known to the public.
Thank you. We are almost at time. I see one or two other questions that I think I'm not going to get time to pose because they're particularly big ones. Touda, I wanted to give you a chance to respond now that we have you back to Bushra Khalili's wonderful comment about the activation of these archives. And perhaps as a final word, you could say a little bit about your hopes for keeping archives in the present, for reactivating and animating these, because it seems this is what you're involved with the Bouanani archives. Would you like to speak to that at all before we finish? Well, it seems like we're losing Touda again. I know she has an unstable connection. I think I want to acknowledge that and everybody's patience and participation, even with these technical possibilities, not as challenges, but as possibilities. I think it's remarkable that we've been able to connect today across at least 3 countries and all of you watching from many places as well. I'd like to thank everybody who put the event together, especially the ArteEast team for making this possible, but especially to you, our panelists, Sido, who is somewhere in the south of Morocco right now, Touda and Léa. Thank you so much for your work, for the inspiration of what you're doing in helping us create living, breathing questions and engagements with this really, really important work. For all of you watching, if you would like to go back to the presentation again, you'll be able to do so on the Eventive platform or on the Arte Archive platform. The ArteEast director, Beth, is pasting this in the chat right now. If you're inspired to make a gift towards the ongoing preservation of ArteEast's archive, which we've been drawing on extensively in these two programs, I invite you to do that. If you're interested in my book, there's a link going into that as well. And I especially urge you to keep following this important work that our panelists today are doing. Thank you all so much for attending, and have a good remaining part of your weekend. Thank you.